Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of Cutting Through. I'm Mitchell Plitnick, the president of Rethinking Foreign Policy and the author of the Cutting Through newsletter on Substack. You can subscribe to Cutting Through at mitchellplitnick.substack.com, where you can also donate to support this work. And if you find this valuable, please like and share Cutting Through with your friends and contacts. That also helps to support what I'm doing here as well. So, with all the horror that's unfolding right now in the Gaza Strip, I think people who are paying attention to the Middle East might not have the bandwidth to pay sufficient attention to what looks like a rapidly deteriorating situation with regard to Iran. So, I mean, put simply, the assault on Iran, the effort at regime change in Iran, is moving forward and is heading towards renewed conflict. Now, again, this isn't a question of what we think of the Islamic Republic, what we think of the current government in Iran. It is not up to the United States, the European Union, or anybody else, and certainly or Israel, to change the government in Iran. That is up to the people of Iran, and it's fine to support the people of Iran. Um, but no one in Iran is calling on us and asking us to destroy that country in order to get rid of the government, which is really what's on the table. So the latest step in this process happened today. The E3, which is the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, uh, initiated a 30-day process to snap back sanctions on Iran. So what that means basically is reinstating the sanctions that existed before the 2015 JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, lifted them ostensibly. I mean, it did not, and let's be clear, that deal did not lift by any stretch all of the sanctions that were on Iran. Iran has continued to experience sanctions. It let it did lift some particularly harsh ones that were really devastating the Iranian economy. Iran's economy is still not in great shape, and the fact is that although those sanctions were lifted, part of the JCPOA also included a Western and particularly an American commitment to helping to stimulate and encourage investment in Iran in order for it to recover from the effects of years of sanctions. And that never happened. Quite the opposite, as a matter of fact. The United States did a lot to discourage and make Iran seem like a very dangerous place to invest your money. Um, the French foreign minister, Jean-Noël Barrot, said that this does not signal the end of diplomacy. We can easily call bullshit on that. Uh, of course, diplomacy is going to continue. Yes, until the fighting really begins in earnest, there will probably be diplomacy on some level. But making this decision was a crushing blow to the hopes of that diplomacy and to the purpose of that diplomacy, which is to avoid uh, catastrophe in Iran and more war in the Middle East. And this was a step in the wrong direction as far as that goes. It will increase Iran's desperation, and it doesn't address any of the reasons that things are not moving forward right now. Both sides they say that they want more diplomacy. Iran has every reason to want diplomacy because very simply they don't want to be bombed again. It's really not a very complicated motivation. Um, or even a particularly noble one. It's just sensible. They don't want to be bombed again. The West has no such particular motivation. Now, as I will explain a little later on, Iran does not have friends, and it's ultimately is a problem. There really, there are countries, of course, that have relations with Iran. There are countries that don't want to see war in the Persian Gulf, of course. Many countries that don't want to see war in the Persian Gulf. But Iran's list of allies grows thin, uh, and uh, and it was thin to begin with, and uh, even those that it has are not of very much use. But while Iran is certainly willing and eager, in fact, I think, for diplomacy to continue, they do insist, and I think quite reasonably, that what happened the last time they engaged in diplomacy, which is that they got bombed, does not happen again. They're saying, if you want to engage us and get us to, reinstate International Atomic Energy Agency inspections and all of that was going on before, well, just tell us that you're not going to bomb us while we're doing that. And I think that's again a reasonable request. I don't know what kind of commitment you could get from the likes of Donald Trump or Benjamin Netanyahu that's really worth the paper it's printed on. But at least to get that is certainly reasonable on Iran's part. I think it is very reasonable demand. So the E3 decided to initiate the snapback process. It takes 30 days. Um, and one of the reasons they decided to do this now is because there already was a draft resolution that had not yet been submitted for a vote at the Security Council that would have extended the limit that there is a point at which if Iran is not seen as being in compliance with their commitments, which they most certainly are not, and again we'll get to that in a bit, um, that sanctions snap back, and Russia and China had drafted a resolution to delay that deadline for when they would snap back, but they have not yet submitted it for a vote, so the E3 moved on it now before they could do that. Let's remember where all this started. All of this starts with the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, pulling out of the Iran deal for no reason other than the fact that it was Barack Obama who who initiated that deal and pushed it through and frankly, it was one of the few true foreign policy progressive steps, not just from Obama, but from any American president in many, many years. It was and should have been a historic moment that Trump undid for no good reason. Let's remember, his own senior staff said Iran was in full compliance with the conditions of that agreement. So it wasn't because of Iran's bad behavior. It was because, or even ostensibly because of that. It was simply because Trump declared it a bad deal and decided we're not going to live up to our agreements that were made by his predecessor, which really was the motivation. So, I think it's important whenever we're talking about this to keep that in mind. Everything we've dealt with since then comes out of that event, comes out of Trump's decision to do that. Uh, Now, what happens when what's going to happen as a result of this process? Well, the vice president of the Quincy Institute, Trita Parsi, whose knowledge, experience, and work on this is really worth your time and checking out and paying attention to. He put out a projection of what he saw was going to happen as a result of this decision. He said that the first thing that we're going to see is the UNSC Security Council will adopt an Israeli demand that Iran cease all uranium enrichment. Um, and he's surely right about that. And I think Russia and China will go along with that. They will not veto it. Israel designed that entire demand uh, as a means of sabotaging diplomacy because they know that's a red line for Iran, that Iran insists on their right to enrich uranium. And they do, in fact, have that right as a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Um, any signatory countries can do it. It needs to be, under certain conditions, but they can do it as long as it's for civilian purposes. They're allowed to do that, and they will not agree to give up that right. I think it's also worth noting here that all of this puts puts the lie that we always knew was a lie to this nonsense that Trump claimed after he bombed Iran that he had obliterated Iran's nuclear program. If he had, we wouldn't be talking about this. If there was no nuclear program to regulate, what would be the issue? There is a nuclear program. Iran has to rebuild many of its facilities. They certainly did a lot of damage, but they still have their enriched uranium, and they still have the technical know-how to do this, and they have the resources to build new facilities. Uh, Trump did not obliterate the Iranian nuclear program. So that was not true. And that, unfortunately, the fact that Trump felt the need to lie about that and will continue to make decisions based on reinforcing that lie and trying to continue to pull the wool over people's eyes is probably going to motivate a lot of American policy going forward. So that's the first thing that Trita said that would happen. Um, Obviously, then the arms embargo on Iran will come back. That's kind of the key feature of snapback, and that means that Tehran will not be able to rebuild its military to deter against future Israeli and American attacks. Um, I mean, again, now they might. I suspect what will happen here is that the embargo will come back. Russia, China, maybe China. I don't know, but maybe Russia. Russia has a little bit more reason to, um, will probably help Iran to some degree to circumvent some of that arms embargo, but there's going to be a limit to what they can do. That's just the fact. There will be a limit to what they will be capable of doing there. And it will absolutely impede Iran's ability. So Iran, which is basically defenseless right now, pretty close to it, um, will remain highly vulnerable to attack. Obviously, also another feature of sanctions is what they are. The Iranian economy is going to be decimated. It's already in a horrible state. It's in very, very bad shape because of existing sanctions, among other reasons. Um, and it will make it worse. Um, Iran's currency is really has really lost a lot of its value. It is frankly just in trouble in virtually every economic measure you can name. It has also a hard time selling its oil, which is its main, obviously its main export. So for all of these reasons, an already crippled economy is going to be hit much harder. And what does that mean? Where does that leave Iran? Well, it probably leads to escalation in the region. It's going to lead Iran's government will have little alternative but to try and make some sort of bold, bombastic statements, and try and be as defiant as they can be, and to try and show their population that they're standing up to Western pressure. And that, of course, opens the door to renewed hostility from Israel, mostly from Israel, but also from the United States. And it will give Israel another, not that it really needs it, but it will give Israel another argument to defend its own aggression against Iran. So that more or less sums up, and I agree with Trita's outlook here. I added a few points of my own to it, but basically, I think he and I are in agreement on that. Except, I would actually go a little bit further. Um, was look at some of the other events, a couple of other events, two key ones that I think happened this week. I don't consider it a coincidence that this was the week that Australia decided to reveal that it had intelligence that showed that Iran was behind attacks on two Jewish sites in Australia. Clearly anti-Semitic attacks. These were Jewish sites, not Israeli ones. Um, and it was when they happened, they were seen as very clear signs of rising anti-Semitism in Australia. Um, and now Australia is saying that Iran was behind them, but they're not offering the evidence. And that in this day and age is problematic. Look, I've seen already, it was almost immediate when this announcement came out, and I saw from the usual corners, a lot of people screaming that this is a false flag operation. They're trying to blame Iran, and it's not true, and it's a lie. Listen, if Australia if the Australian government refuses to release the evidence that it has, that it claims it has, that shows that Iran was behind this, then that's what you're going to get. I mean, people will have reason, and good reason, frankly, given some of the things we see that go on in this era. Um, they will have reason to believe that perhaps this isn't true. When we live in a world where people, where 2 million people in Gaza can be starved to death, and yet a significant number of people still claim and and others still believe that that's not just not happening. When it's there, it's being broadcast. The evidence is all over the place. I mean, it's been documented, and it's been shown on video, and everyone has seen it, and yet people still think it's not happening. When you live in that world, look, you want the evidence. You have to see the evidence when you're making accusations. So that being said, I don't necessarily think that, I am not among those who are willing to call this a false flag because there's no evidence that Australia made it up either. Um, that being said, again, the timing is very, very interesting. It's clearly self-serving for Australia because they just got into a huge diplomatic row with Israel, where Benjamin Netanyahu again accused blood libel and anti-Semitism and blah 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 blah, and helping Hamas and all the other usual crap that he throws out that just besmirches the memories of every Jew who ever suffered anti-Semitism. Thank you, myself included. Um, so with all of that going on, and ties between Australia and Israel fraying quickly, there is a self-serving interest in Australia bringing this out now, and I think this is really my point. I'm not endorsing the false flag theory, but I do think the timing is important. Even assuming that this accusation is true, the fact that it came out now is self-serving for that reason. Also, when we consider that, we're seeing this renewed attention to Iran, and this idea that Iran is in violation of its agreements under the JCPOA, which it is. And again, let's go back to this point, and I think it cannot be stressed enough. Iran is in violation of its agreement with the JCPOA because it was responding to the unilateral abrogation of that agreement by the United States, which led not only to a military attack, but also to severe economic consequences when the U.S. pulled out. So I think we need to keep that in mind at all times. So yes, so what was Iran going to do? Iran had no other way to strike back at the United States except by enriching uranium to a higher and higher degree, which is against the agreement in the JCPOA, going beyond the level of enrichment that is needed for civilian use. They did that because it was the one thing they could do to make the world sit up and listen and say, hey, maybe let's go back to the deal. That was what they were trying to do. One could say it was ill-advised, but it's certainly not a reason for this kind of response. It does not merit. The other event that happened this week, a leading Iranian official, Mohammed Sadr, who is a member of Iran's Expediency Council, which is a very key advisory group to the supreme leader, accused Russia a day or two ago of having helped Israel with targeting intelligence during its attack on Iran earlier this year. That is a very significant accusation, because if Russia was helping Israel, that is, I mean, that is a severe blow to the legitimacy of the strategic partnership agreement that Iran and Russia signed back in January. And this was, in fact, Sadr's point. He said, look, I'm not, his stance was, I'm not advocating to break off relations with Russia, but we can't trust them. And we cannot rely on them, partnership agreement or no. And that's how we have to approach Russia. Russia is not a trustworthy ally. I waited for a while and looked through the news and kept scanning and looking to see if someone in the Iranian government would push back on him, or if Russia would come out and say something about it. Both have remained silent. we may see a statement soon. I would imagine Russia will offer some sort of denial, one way or the other. But the fact that it wasn't immediately responded to, and he wasn't, and Sadr wasn't immediately slapped back, tells me he's probably right. Um, and it makes a certain amount of sense. I wrote a piece earlier this year talking about Iran, and the truth is that Iran does not have friends. No, the certainly the there are, countries in the Gulf that have relations with Iran, even some that are reasonably, like Qatar and Oman, that are, reasonably uh, friendly relations. But those are transactional relationships. There's not really uh, any country that has a deep, alliance and sort of kindred tie with Iran. Syria and Lebanon used to. It's not true anymore, thanks to the fall of Assad and the dismantlement, or at least diminishment, of Hezbollah. Um, there is Yemen, for whatever that's worth. Not exactly a key player on the stage. Russia has been considered Iran's key ally, but as we see, Russia has its own interests, and Russia is not particularly devoted or loyal to Iran. Um, Russia, I think, has an implicit mistrust of Iran, quite frankly. I think they have, in general, we've seen that Russia, certainly under Putin, but I think in general, their disposition towards theocratic, especially theocratic Muslim regimes, is not all that positive. They can do business. They can do business, absolutely, but they're not going to go out on a limb for Iran. And I think, again, I think there's a certain sense of this in Iran, which is, this is one of the reasons Iran was never satisfied with the idea of having Russia be the sort of guardian of their nuclear stockpile. So, Iran in general, we can look at, the fact, listen, remember the German chancellor earlier this year said Israel's doing our dirty work for us. Um, there is really, there are really very, very few people anywhere in the world. And I mean, when I say people, I mean states and world leaders, who don't want to see uh, the Islamic Republic fall. That is something that is shared, and that's why I think, I've said a couple of times that I expect certain things to happen at the Security Council. So, and some of you may have wondered, well, don't you think Russia will veto, or China will veto? And no, I don't. I don't think either one of those countries are particularly fun. They're not looking to undermine them. They're not looking to fight them. They're not looking for regime change themselves, and they certainly China, but I think also Russia. They all want stability in the Persian Gulf. And But they don't love Iran. And I think they see Iran's revolutionary government as one that, even in the best of times, always keeps things simmering. There's always going to be a certain simmering tension between them and Gulf Arab states, and them and the United States, and with Europe, and they all would, none of them are going to cry to see the Islamic Republic go. And listen, it's not a great regime. And if the Iranian people decide that they want another kind of government, I completely would support that. This is not this is a regime that, is a serial human rights violator. They do a lot of, things that are very wrong. Um, that violate human rights norms. We know this. That's not, that is not a standard. Obviously, that is certainly not something that's motivating um any of these countries. I'm just saying, from my own point of view, it's not a regime I'm interested in defending. What I am interested in defending is a global order where we in the West, or anywhere else, do not decide what another country's system of government is. We leave that to the people. And we can support, again, I'll advocate it forever. We can support the people. And we should support the people, not with lip service and with platitudes, and with self-serving policies the way we do now. When we see American, often Republicans, talk about the Uyghurs, for example, Do we really think they care, or are they just looking to make China look bad? So again, same here. Oh, I mean, it's that old line. I mean, we hear it from Benjamin Netanyahu. He talks about we have no problem with the Iranian people, same as he says we have no issue with the people in Gaza. It's only Hamas. Well, but you're starving 2 million people in Gaza. You're targeting civilians all over the place in Gaza. You're killing far, far more civilians than is the norm in Gaza. And again, and they did the same when they attacked Iran. So that's all nonsense. Again, I'm not defending the regime here, but we have no business in engaging in regime change. That's what I think the key is. But I do also think that many, many world leaders will be very happy and are not going to lose any sleep over regime change efforts that emanate from Jerusalem or from Washington. Um, so, what I expect to happen, if these sanctions are snapped back, it seems virtually certain at this point, unless something radically changes in the next 30 days. In terms, Iran, there are ways Iran could probably avert it, but we would have to see. The E3 could pull back and halt this process and allow China and Russia to bring their resolution, and that could go through, and then that could push back again the sanctions for another year. Um, But if that doesn't happen, what I expect to happen in relatively short order in the coming months, I think after Israel is done with its major invasion of Gaza City that it's doing right now and goes back to its just regularly scheduled genocide. Um, I think we will see Israel begin to target the IRGC much more intensely, both within Iran and in other places around the Middle East. And I think it will be fully backed in doing something like that by many global powers. Not just the United States, not just Europe, countries in the global South. There's a lot of places where the IRGC is not beloved, and they will target those individuals to the point where the IRGC, they feel at least, is severely compromised, which I think Israel is capable of doing, especially if they get intelligence help from their many allies. Sanctions will come back, uh, crush an already struggling Iranian economy. And if that doesn't serve to topple Iran from within, well, we know that since Trump did not obliterate the Iranian nuclear program, Israel will have its excuse to renew an attack on Iran. What I'm saying, the short of it, what I'm saying is I think we are seeing the process beginning of a regime change program that is not the long-term one, a sense of sort of long-term pressure on the regime in Iran that we've seen for a while, but rather one that's more accelerated that aims in relatively short order, matter of months, maybe a year or two, to actually see this government in Iran fall. And I think we are still seeing that going. There is a next chapter that we've already, I believe, started to write in the Iran war that we saw earlier this year. And it's coming soon, and it has the potential, as it did before. The first round, fortunately, did not ignite the region. Um, any time that this is happening, there remains that potential. But even if it doesn't, the effects of this sort of regime change, as we've seen so many times in the past, including in Iran itself, are always unpredictable and often not anywhere close to what we think it is. And I think it's very dangerous because I think a lot of these events are being manipulated by Benjamin Netanyahu, whose essential agenda is endless war. That is what serves him best. And I think we need to be very, very mindful of that. And unfortunately, we don't have leaders either, certainly not in the United States, but not in Europe either, who seem savvy enough to be able to navigate the political waters that Netanyahu knows so well how to manipulate, excuse me. So on that grim note, uh, again, please like, share, subscribe. If you can support this work, this is what I do. I can only do it with your support. So mitchellplitnick.substack.com. You'll find ways to donate to share and let your friends know that this is a site worth supporting. So thanks, and I'll talk to you soon.